Hello everyone, welcome to the applicants evening for A-level classical civilization. It's really brilliant to have you all here. Welcome to the sort of virtual world of Reigate College. Okay, so first of all, some introductions. So my name is Sarah Bell and I'm the course leader of classical civilization here. We are also really lucky this evening to have two wonderful students from the upper sixth joining us, Natalia and Stan. So I'll just get them to introduce themselves. So first of all, Natalia, please say hi. If you can tell everyone what subjects you're studying, what you're planning to do next year, and what school you've come from as well. That would be brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I also study Spanish, English literature and acting. My old school is Ashcombe and I hope next year to go to Bristol and study liberal arts.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Stan, the same questions to you. So other subjects you're studying, your plans for next year, and what school you've come from.
Hi, I'm Stan. I study classical civilization, maths, physics, and further maths. And I came from Royal Alexandra and Albert School, and I'm hoping to study engineering next year.
That's great, thank you, Stan. So you'll be hearing more from Natalia and Stan later. But first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're going to hopefully do over the next hour. So the first part of the session is going to be me basically telling you about the course and everything you need to know, really. And then we're going to do a little mini lesson to give you a little bit of a flavour for it. Hopefully you've managed to have a look through the task sheet, but don't worry, I won't be asking you questions and expecting you to reply, but I will be asking Natalia and Stan what they think as well. So really the main thing I want you to do at home is to ask any questions that you've got. So any questions about the course, about the lessons, anything at all, if you can just type them into the chat, and then at the end of the session we'll go through hopefully all of them, and either myself or Natalia or Stan will be able to answer them for you. So lots of questions, please. Okay, so the big question is, what is classical civilization? So most of the students who start studying this subject at Reigate have never studied classical civilization before. They've got a little bit of background knowledge, obviously they've got an interest in it, but it's a completely new subject. So if you are one of those students, then please don't worry at all. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of what classical civilization is. So it's the study of the ancient world, really, and every aspect to the ancient world. So we look at literature, and that includes biographies, it includes poetry, it includes prose, it includes all different types of literature. Also the culture. So the aim is really by the end of the 2 years, you'll have a really good understanding about the ancient world and the culture and how people lived, what they thought, what they studied, what their daily life was like. We also look at beliefs, and I'll expand on that a little bit more when I talk about the Greek religion unit and their art and architecture. And you'll see in front of you a picture of one of my favourite places in the whole world, which is the Temple of Poseidon at Sunion in Greece. But the Greeks and the Romans really have got some wonderful art and architecture. So as you can see, it's a really varied course. And the main focus of the course is really the Greeks and Romans, but the ancient world is not pigeonholed into Greece and into Rome. It expands over the Mediterranean, into North Africa, into Western Asia. So really we'll be looking at lots of different cultures and civilizations as part of the course. So lots and lots. So what does the course involve specifically? So again, this is important for you to know and to consider. So in year one, you'll study a poem. Well, we call it a poem, but actually you'll read it in translation. You won't have to know any ancient Greek or Latin. Don't worry, we'll get onto that later. You'll study this poem by Homer, who was a writer, we think in about the 8th century BC, or although the question of whether Homer actually wrote it is a whole other big question that we will cover. But it's a great poem about Greek myth, and it's about the Greek hero Odysseus, who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, which you might have heard of, you might not. If you haven't, don't worry. And it's about his journey home from the Trojan War. So there was this huge war in Troy. He came up with the idea of the Trojan horse. That meant the Greeks defeated the Trojans, and then he wanted to get home to his kingdom, to his wife and his son. As part of that, he gets involved in lots of different adventures. So there's goddesses he gets involved with, there's lots of monsters. He obviously is the hero of the tale, so manages to defeat them all, although he does lose quite a few of his men along the way, but we'll gloss over that for now. And at the end, he finally gets to his home, his lovely island of Ithaca, but he also has problems there that he needs to deal with. And so we look at that as well. And it's a story of revenge, and it's a story of hospitality, and it's a story of love. And it's really the basis. Lots of people would argue that the Odyssey is the basis of lots of the stories that we have today. And we'll discuss that. We'll always be looking at what we can learn from the classical world and how the classical world has influenced us nowadays. So we'll be doing that in year 1, but we'll also be doing another unit called the Imperial Image. So the Odyssey is what I would call a Greek unit, and the Imperial Image is what I would call a Roman unit. And we look at Rome's very first emperor, who was a man called, well, he started off being called Octavian, as you will find out soon, and then he ended up being Augustus. And the idea of that unit is to look at the propaganda machine that Augustus and his team managed to come up with to basically justify his position as emperor. Because before Augustus, it had been a republic, which is a bit like a democracy, but not quite. And he basically gradually gathered all the power up, but he needed to justify that to the people of Rome, the people of the empire. So we look at different works of art, we look at poetry, we look at coinage. It's a really varied visual unit, and it will give you a really good insight into Rome in the 1st century BC. So that's year 1. Remember, if you've got any questions, type them in. In year 2, we go on to study a text called the Aeneid, which is my personal favourite, by Virgil, who is a Roman writer. And what is really good about the Aeneid is that it's written at the time of Augustus, so it links in really well with the Imperial Image unit and gives a lot of opportunity to revise that year 1 material as well. But the Aeneid is a wonderful story. It's about a Trojan refugee, this time fleeing from Troy as it burns behind him, and the group of people that he takes on his journey to try and find a new home. And the new home will be in Italy, and his descendants will eventually go on to be the Romans. But I mean, it is a piece of Roman propaganda. I think, you know, most of the students would agree with that, but it's also a story about suffering. It's a story about humanity. It's a story about relationships. And it's really brilliant. And both the texts are beautifully written, and we will study them as pieces of literature, as well as for what they can tell us about the culture in which they were written. And alongside that, in year 2, you'll also study Greek religion. So this isn't really the study of myths, although we will look at different myths because obviously they inevitably tie in with the study of Greek religion. But we'll be thinking about what the Greeks actually believed, and also we'll look at what the Greeks actually did. So that will be looking at their sanctuary. So we look at Olympia, another place called Delphi, the Acropolis in Athens. We look at their rituals like sacrifice and offerings. We look about what they believed about the nature of the gods as well. So it's hopefully you can see that as a course, it's really broad ranging, but also really interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons it is popular as a new course, because you cover lots of different things. You know, if you like literature, if you like art, if you like myth and religion, then it's a really good one for you. So that's a summary of what the course involves. Okay, so the less interesting bit, but something that you need to know, is about how it's assessed. So lots of courses at Reigate have coursework as part of the assessment, but classical civilization is 100% exam. And I would urge you to consider that when you're making your choices, because some students actually quite like that. They quite like the idea of everything being assessed at the end. It's a chance to gather all their knowledge, whereas other students actually find that a little bit intimidating. What I would say is that we spend the whole of the 2 years preparing you for that exam. Natalia and Stan hopefully will give you a nod to say that we're practicing exam questions all the time. We have assessments regularly, and so the idea is you're fully prepared for that. So there's 3 exams. The first one is the World of the Hero, and that will be on the 2 poems that you study, so the Aeneid and the Odyssey, and that's the longest exam, 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it's different sort of length of questions. So you'll have 10-mark questions, 20-mark questions, and a final 30-mark question. And what's really brilliant about the 30-mark question is that even though that might sound a little bit scary, it gives you a real chance to engage with scholarship and secondary sources, what other people think about the text that you've studied. Then the imperial image and the Greek religion exams are both 1 hour and 45 minutes long, and they have a very similar structure, except for there's one less 20-mark question. I think that's how it works. So yeah, 100% exam, 3 exams at the end of 2 years, and it's all essay writing based. I think there's something like 10 marks available for short mark questions. So hopefully that answers any questions that you may have about that. Okay, so a little bit more information about the department. So lessons per week. So this will be the same for all of the subjects that you study at Reigate. So you'll have 2 lessons a week, and each lesson will be 2 hours long. And sometimes students who start Reigate aren't used to that, but trust me, we have seen it with the lower 6th and the upper 6th over the last couple of years. It's a really positive thing having 2-hour lessons. It gives you a real opportunity to get in depth into the subject and to sort of engage with your teacher and your fellow classmates lots. There's also extra support lessons available for those students who need it. And perhaps the most exciting thing is trips. So in the last 3 years, these have included Greece and Rome. Obviously that was pre-COVID, but fingers crossed we'll be able to get back there as soon as possible. Also tours of the British Museum. So we're just in the process of organising that for the upper 6th at the moment. We've also been to an exhibition at the British Museum. They had one on Troy a couple of years ago. And there was a visit to Warwick University. And actually next Friday, we're doing a live streaming of a Greek tragedy at college, which lots of students are coming to see. And that's done by Warwick University. We've had visiting speakers over the years, and then last year we had a couple of virtual visiting speakers, and we've got more of those booked in for this term as well. So we've tried to, even though obviously there's been limitations, we've tried to get as much engagement with universities, the sort of wider classical community as possible. And we also were very lucky to have a virtual tour of the Museum of Archaeology, or Classical Archaeology, in Cambridge last year as well. So there's lots going on. It's quite an exciting department, really. And then I just thought I'd whet your taste buds here with some pictures of our Rome trip that was in 2018 and our Greece trip that was in 2019. So as I say, fingers crossed, but you can see the sun is shining and everyone looks like they're enjoying themselves, because there's really nothing can really sort of replace being there and seeing the sites that you have studied. And I'm really hoping that the upper 6th this year, even though they won't have had an opportunity to go with the college, it will be part of their sort of wider future plans to visit these places that they've studied and been able to engage with. Okay, so you're probably thinking, yes, brilliant, this sounds amazing. What do I need to be able to get onto the course? So in order to do well on the course, a grade 5 in English language is the minimum, really, because as I said, there is quite a bit of essay writing and also quite a bit of reading. So you need to be quite comfortable with English language. You don't have to be brilliant at essay writing. As I've said, there's loads of support involved. You don't have to love reading either, but you do have to like a good story because they are good stories. You also, a passing interest, an interest in the ancient Greeks and Romans would be good. I'm not, as I say, expecting you to really know any sort of solid details about the Greeks and Romans. We'll talk to you a little bit later about the starter activities we have to make you more familiar with that. But hopefully the reason you're here is because you think that it sounds quite interesting, and perhaps you've had some experience of the Greeks and Romans at primary school and you'd like to explore them further. As I said, enjoy reading. You don't have to be brilliant at reading, but enjoy a good story. And the bottom one, the bottom bullet point there might seem a little bit odd, the desire to understand more about the world we live in. But my sort of mantra is that classics is everywhere, because it really is. I mean, Stan was eating a Caesar salad wrap earlier, or a chicken and bacon Caesar wrap earlier, and I said classics is everywhere. Caesar, that comes from Julius Caesar. And you will see lots of those things everywhere. And I think when you can understand how civilization or civilizations or cultures have contributed to the way we live now, that really does give you, it does open your mind and give you a greater understanding of the world you live in nowadays. And that's sort of the greatest thing I think I get from classics on an ongoing basis. So those are the requirements, not much really. Okay, so what else do we have to offer in the classics department? Well, quite a lot. So we do as activities both beginners Latin and beginners ancient Greek. So the Latin activity runs over the course of the year. It takes place in a lunchtime, and the ancient Greek we do as a little sort of beginners 5-week course, which we're in the middle of at the moment. And they're both sold out. Well, I say sold out, you don't have to pay for them, but they are sort of they are full, which is really exciting that students want to learn these ancient languages. And again, you see the sort of classics is everywhere as well with those languages. And studying subjects like Latin and ancient Greek, that's going to make you stand out to universities, to employers, and also they have a practical application, because if you are thinking of a career in law or horticulture or languages or medicine, you are going to come across Latin and ancient Greek, and it's also fun. I always describe Latin and ancient Greek as quite therapeutic, but you may not agree with me. I don't know. We also run a classics club as well, which is just for people who want to talk about all things classics, and we do lots of sort of fun activities there. That's also been full this year. So we do anything from studying mystery cults to designing our own Greek vases. So there's lots that you can get engaged with. Obviously, you don't have to do any of those things if you don't want to, but they are there if you would like. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a little sort of mini lesson. So I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of historical background. So this is to the imperial image units, which is the Roman unit. And then we're going to look at those sources that you were sent on your task sheet. I'm going to get Stan and Talia involved, and hopefully you'll feel like you've learned a little bit more about what it is like to study classical civilization at Reigate College. Okay, so I need to introduce you to some people. They are going to be very important. Their names are Octavian, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra. Now you may be looking, this is just an aside here, you may be looking at the name Octavian and thinking, well, that looks like oct, which is linked to 8. And the reason for that is the Romans they're not very imaginative with naming, but they tended to name their children after the number of child they are. So Octavian may have been the 8th child, or his ancestors somewhere along the line was an 8th child and that name got passed down. Anyway, interesting fun fact. So Octavian is a really key figure, and what you need to know is he's going to go on to become Augustus. So we may use those names interchangeably. That is a feature of classical civilization. Some characters tend to have a couple of names, but don't worry, we'll guide you through it. Then there is Mark Antony. I'll explain a little bit more about him in a moment. And Cleopatra, again, who you may or may not have heard of. She was the Queen of Egypt. All right, so Julius Caesar was a sort of top man in Rome. And this was in the sort of first half of the 1st century BC, so 2,100 years ago. And he basically started getting a lot of power, and he marched on Rome with an army. Some people loved him, some people didn't like him, and in the end the Senate were very, very uncomfortable with the amount of power that he was gathering. And so a little sort of cohort of conspirators got together, and they basically assassinated him. Shakespeare came up with a famous play, classics is everywhere, and yeah, the idea is that everyone wanted to get back to being a republic, and it looked like it was going to become a monarchy under Julius Caesar. So he's gone, yeah. But unfortunately for those people who wanted a republic, he has left his great nephew, Octavian, everything, including his very popular, in some circles, name. And so Octavian's very happy about this. He's a really young man at the time, so nobody's too worried that he's going to try and do the same thing as his father, more for them. And then there's this other person called Mark Antony. Now, he was Julius Caesar's best friend, and he's very cross that Octavian has been left everything, because he was hoping that everything was going to be left to him. So he runs off to Egypt, and there he meets and marries the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. And Cleopatra quite likes power. Mark Antony quite likes power. And so Octavian begins to worry about this, and he manages to convince the Senate, the government, that's the name for the government, to wage war against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian, with his right-hand man Agrippa, fights a really famous naval battle against Mark Antony and Cleopatra in 31 BC. That's called the Battle of Actium. And then Octavian's basically winning, or Agrippa's basically winning. They're winning together. And so Mark Antony and Cleopatra both flee. They get back to Egypt. They're in a proper pickle by this point, and they need to work out what to do. And eventually it becomes clear that they can't do anything. So Mark Antony commits suicide. Cleopatra hangs around for a little bit thinking, can she make this work for her? But eventually she realizes she can't. And so she commits suicide. So quite a bit of background there, but that's just a bit of context really for the sources that we're going to look at. So here is the wonderful coin that you were sent. There's a few details around here. Hopefully you had a chance to think about the images that you could see. And it's very much, when we study these, it's sort of a say what you see exercise. So so there's a few more details there. You know, maybe just spend a moment having a look, seeing if you can identify maybe who might be Augustus or Agrippa, what the figures on the right hand side are. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'm first going to ask Natalia a little question. So we have Augustus and Agrippa on this coin. Why is that interesting?
Well, it's interesting because even though Agrippa is one of Augustus's like best kind of people military, like he's not often depicted on coinage. So this is kind of rare for Augustus.
Excellent, thank you. So that's unusual straight away. I mean, and probably when you were thinking about coinage, you were thinking about the fact we always have the Queen's head on coins. Here we have two heads. So here we have Augustus or Octavian acknowledging Agrippa's involvement. On the other side of the coin, Natalia, we've got some interesting images. What message do you, oh no, sorry, on the two heads sign of the coin, what message do you think is being sent there? So looking maybe a little bit more closely at the inscriptions there. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
So the inscriptions are like really important. So if you look at the top, it says IMP, which stands for Imperator, which basically means that Augustus or Octavian was like a good military leader as kind of like a title. And then at the bottom it says Divi F, which is short for Divi Filius, which means son of a god. And that's kind of alluding to how he is the son of Julius Caesar, who was deified after he died.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Natalia. Lots of really good information there and lots of insights for everyone at home into the sort of character that that Octavian was. So Stan, now looking at the other side of the coin with this creature, this crocodile on it, what sort of symbolism, what message do you see on that side of the coin?
Well, on the other side of the coin, there is a Col Nem inscription, which refers to a colony in France, which tells us that that this coin reached as far as places in France, showing that the message Augustus was trying to portray spread out across the whole empire. And then also there is a chained crocodile. You can tell it's chained because of the links that go around its neck up and across the tree. And the crocodile is a big symbol of Egypt. So this coin shows that Augustus had control over Egypt at this point because he just defeated Cleopatra in war.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Stan. And you sort of alluded to it there. So this is a Japondis coin. What does this tell us about the audience that this coin would have reached, and therefore this message about Egypt and power?
Well, as it's a Dupondius, that is a sort of a cheaper coin. So it's made of copper, which means that it would have been very common around Rome and the empire, meaning that lots of sort of lower class people especially would have seen this coin. So he was almost trying to spread his message to as many people as he could by putting it on this coin.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Natalia, how much control do you think Augustus would have had over this image?
It's difficult to know because he definitely would have had kind of a team controlling his image, or like kind of controlling what's depicted on coins. But the fact that he's always depicted as young, even when he's older, shows that he like has a lot of control over kind of how he appears to the people. So yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Some really thoughtful comments there. And Stan, what does the fact that it's minted so long after the battle tell us? So this is minted, we think, 20 to 10 BC. So the Battle of Actium was in 31 BC. What clues could that give us about this battle and the way people thought about it?
Well, the fact that it happened, that the coin was made so long after it happened, shows that this battle was really significant in Augustus's own personal history, and how he wants his Rome to be seen in history, sort of how he's controlled it. So it's very symbolic of Augustus's victories, I think.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to think about audience, and we do quite a lot of that. It's a really key part of the Imperial Image course, thinking about who these sources would have reached and what the messages they were sending. And I think it is really interesting, like you said, Stan, that this message about Actium is still so clear. Augustus is still so proud to have conquered Egypt, and quite rightly, because Egypt was a huge area of land. They controlled the grain supply for most of the Mediterranean, and also it's a very striking symbolic image of power as well. Okay, thank you both for that. Right, we're going to move on now to the poem. Okay, so this is an extract from a poet called Horace, who was a Roman poet. What's interesting about poetry in the Augustan period is that Augustus had a friend, or some people call him like a culture secretary, called Maecenas. And Maecenas' job was basically to employ lots of different artists and poets and basically pay them to produce great poetry. Some people argue that he was paying them to produce poetry that glorified Augustus, but actually that's sort of simplifying it quite a lot. I think what Augustus wanted was to be known for part of his legacy to be creating almost a renaissance in literature. But then there is a bit of an inevitability about that. If the person who's paying you to write poetry is paying you, then you're not necessarily going to object to it. But so hopefully for your task, you had a look at it, you identified some positive language, some negative language. Again, the poetry can seem a little bit frightening or a little bit intimidating sometimes, but you don't have to analyze it in the same way you do English literature. What you need to do is try and draw out of it why it's effective, whether it's successful, and the messages that it is sending. So I'm just going to read through it briefly, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. Now's the time for drinking deep, and now's the time to beat the earth with unfettered feet. The time to set out the gods' sacred couches, my friends, and prepare a Salian feast. It would have been wrong before today to broach the Caecuban wines from out the ancient bins, while a maddened queen was still plotting the capital's and the empire's ruin, with her crowd of deeply corrupted creatures, sick with turpitude, she violent with hope of all kinds and intoxicated by fortune's favour. But it calmed her frenzy that scarcely a single ship escaped the flames, and Caesar reduced the distracted thoughts bred by mariotic wine to true fear, pursuing her close as she fled from Rome, out to capture that deadly monster, bind her, as the sparrowhawk follows the gentle dove, or the swift hunter chases the hare over the snowy plains of Thessaly. So the woman here that's being spoken about is Cleopatra, and Caesar also refers to Augustus or Octavian. 3 names. I know, it's not confusing. Honestly, you'll be fine with it. Okay, so I'm just going to ask Natalia, what do you think, or what do you think of the way Cleopatra is portrayed here? And feel free to pick out some particular phrases if you can.
I think definitely the main image of her that's being portrayed is that she's like mad and plotting against Rome. So if you look at words like mad and queen and plotting, and like deeply corrupted, it kind of portrays her as like an evil villain against Rome. But then also it's like interesting near the end when it says that she's like a gentle dove and a hare, which is kind of like a conflicting image.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Natalia. Yeah, it can be quite confusing, but poetry nowadays still has many interpretations, doesn't it? Why do you think, Natalia, that Mark Antony's not mentioned here? There's no mention of him at all, is there?
Yeah, I think it's because Augustus wanted to portray the Battle of Actium as a foreign war, not a civil war, because like civil wars were kind of not thought of as a good thing, and then a foreign war is more like he's kind of conquering a foreign enemy, so that's probably why.
Okay, that's brilliant, thank you. And yeah, I mean, before Octavian came to power, and actually Julius Caesar was part of what we call the civil wars of the 1st century BC, there had been one civil war after another in Rome. It was a very sort of negative thing. And part of what Augustus wanted to do was show that he had brought an end to civil wars. So the last thing he wants to do is be remembered for another civil war. So I'm sure that message had been filtered through to Horace there. Okay, Stan, what do you think about how Augustus is portrayed, or Caesar as he's named here?
Well, Augustus is presented, especially in the lower part of the poem, as a swift hunter and a sparrowhawk, which shows that he can be sort of ruthless when he needs to be, and he's very he wins battles and he's very scary. And then also you've got the fact that he's defeated Cleopatra, so it almost glorifies him in a way, saying that he's defeated such a big common enemy, and that he's done such a good job of that. So yeah.
That's brilliant, Stan. Thank you. Thank you both for your really good analysis of the poem. So what we can see here is that the poetry is quite complex. It could be seen that there are different messages coming through there. The depiction of Cleopatra maybe implies some sympathy towards her. She looks almost like a victim, doesn't she, in the second part of that extract. But in the first part, his language is really strong. It's really almost aggressive towards her and her nature. It's very sort of like she's very anti-Roman. So it's really interesting to analyze the poetry like that. And when we think about poetry, we need to also think about the audience. So the audience of poetry, we think, and it's not as straightforward as this, and you will hear me say a lot, if you decide to study the course, perhaps, maybe, we don't really know, but that's part of what I love about classics, because you can make up your own mind, is that perhaps this reflects that the elite of Rome, the people who would have been listening to poetry at their dinner parties, although it's possible that these poems were read out in public and therefore were accessible to the illiterate of Rome, and most of Rome were illiterate at this time. But it's possible that it does reflect sort of mixed feelings about Octavian and the campaign against Cleopatra. So really interesting to think about how it's portrayed here. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit interactive. How exciting! And we're going to put up a couple of polls. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about each question, and then I'd just like you to vote. I'm not going to ask you to defend yourself. I'm just going to ask you to have a think. So the first question is, how successful do you think the portrayal of Augustus as a capable military leader is in these sources? Okay, wow, thank you. I'm pleased to see there's so many of you there still. So very successful. Yeah, that's great. I think you could definitely defend that position. Okay, so the next question is, we'll just wait for that to come up. Okay, brilliant. So the next question is, how successful do you think is the portrayal of Cleopatra as an enemy that needed to be defeated in these sources? All right, people are in there already. Okay, so 30 seconds. Okay, brilliant. Really interesting there. Very much a split, and I think that is reflected definitely by the poem and also by the coin, and the fact that actually Cleopatra isn't overtly depicted there, is she, in an enemy way? But brilliant. Okay, thank you. Right, so I think there is a final question. We can just wait for that to magically appear. There we go. Having looked at the evidence, so the coin and the poem, do you think Augustus portrayed the conflict with Mark Antony and Cleopatra as a civil war or a foreign war? So 30 seconds go. Okay, so that's pretty decisive as a foreign war, but I'm pleased to see a few of you are sort of branching out there and thinking actually from the other perspective, because I think, yes, certainly in Horace there are hints that he's inviting people to think about the civil war aspect of it, where he just sort of defends Cleopatra. Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you so much for participating. Okay, I'm just going to close that down. So these are the ones we've already looked at. You've all made up your minds, which is brilliant. Okay, so that is our sort of mini lesson, mini lecture over. So now is the time for Q&A. So if you've got any questions, then please pop them in. Feel free to pop them into the chat. That would be brilliant. And hopefully then I can answer them. So I'm going to start off by just asking a question that I've got here. So I'm going to direct it to you, Stan. Was it very difficult for you starting a new subject? I'm assuming it was new for you. If not, feel free to deflect to Natalia.
It was brand new for me, taking classics, but I thought because I'd had a strong interest in Greek mythology from reading the Percy Jackson books, I don't know if anyone in the audience has, but so it was almost in a way pursuing an interest of mine, and it was quite nice to finally look at something different, because obviously you've done English and you've done sort of reading books from that perspective, but it was nice to read a book that has a really good story behind it instead of one of the prescribed ones. But yeah, it was more of interest than anything else. That's why I took classics.
Okay, that's brilliant. And that really does reflect, I think, a lot of the motivation to take classics. Also, Natalia, I'll direct the same question to you about whether it was difficult taking up a new subject, or was it a new subject for you?
Yeah, it was a new subject for me, and similar to Stan, I just took it because I just loved the idea of it, because I love like art, literature, history, and it kind of combines all of those things. So yeah, and I definitely don't think it was too hard going into it, because I think probably 90% of the people haven't done it at GCSE. So I think it's definitely not kind of, you're not expected to have known anything beforehand. But also I feel like a lot of kind of Greek mythology and things like that, you kind of probably already know some of it. So yeah, I would say that it's not too hard at all.
That's brilliant, thank you. And that's because clearly classics is everywhere. It's just a lot of us don't know it yet. Okay, that's great. So we've got another question here. So this is more for me. So it's how big, how many classes are there? So that's a really good question. So generally our classics classes vary between about 16 and 20 students in each class. And obviously it depends on the intake each year, how many classes there are. So this year we have 2 classes in the upper 6th, but in the lower 6th, we're having a bit of a bumpy year here, and we've got four classes in the lower 6th this year. So about 16 to 20 students per class, which is a really nice number. It gives an opportunity for everyone to make friends, get to know each other, contribute their ideas, get lots of good discussions going. So yeah, it's really good. And then yeah, 2 classes in the upper 6th this year, 4 classes in the lower 6th. Okay. Oh, so this is another question for me. So is classics considered a facilitating subject by uni? So this is a really good and quite contentious issue. So it's not considered a facilitating subject. Those are generally just the sort of core national curriculum subjects. But most unis have a sort of list of subjects that they accept, and that isn't generally on the along the lines of facilitating subjects that you might traditionally see. Classical civilization is on those lists. It's a really well respected A-level to have, and actually it's preferred for a lot of different subjects at university, particularly if you're going on to do a sort of classics related degree. So we try not to, as a whole at the college, get too bogged down with facilitating subjects. Obviously, if you're looking to study something particular, like medicine or to become a vet, then there are specific subjects that you need. But really what's important is what you want is to study subjects you enjoy, and those are the subjects that you're going to get a good grade in. So hopefully that answers that question for you. Okay, so for trips, where in Greece and Rome do we go? Well, where don't we go? That's more the question. So in Rome, you'll definitely need your walking boots on. So if we do go to Rome and it's not been decided quite yet where we will go on a trip, if we do, then we basically visit everywhere. So of course we visit the big sites like the Colosseum, and we do the Vatican, but also all those sites that we study specifically in the course. So that's things like the Forum of Augustus, the Mausoleum, the Areopagite. Don't worry if this means nothing to you, you will know it very well very soon. So yeah, we sort of look at everything, and I'm quite well known for my obelisk tours. That may or may not interest you, but I love an obelisk. Augustus loved an obelisk. Okay, and in Greece we go to all the ancient sites, so that's really jam-packed, more time on the coach. So we start in Athens, and then we tend to make our way round the ancient sites in Greece. So Delphi, Olympia, we also go to Corinth, Epidaurus. So it's a real sort of whistle stop tour. That trip tends to be a bit of a longer trip. Okay, all right, so this is a really good question for the students, actually. So I'll ask Stan and Natalia is this one, is how independent is the studying, or how independent do you have to be in your studies? I'll start with you, Natalia.
I think if you're thinking like kind of how independent is it, as in how independent do you need to be, I think it's always good with every subject to be able to study independently, and kind of there is quite a lot of like homework as with any subject, which you obviously need to be able to be on top of by yourself, but also and it's not kind of too independent in the way that you get a lot of help, and the classics teachers are always there, like if you need any help, and they have like plus classes as well if you're struggling or want to like get your grades up a bit. So yeah, I would say you need to be able to work by yourself, but you're not left alone.
That's great, thank you, Natalia. And Stan?
I think content-wise, you learn most of it within the classroom. And so it's from learning what you need to write about. You sort of, it's not as independent, but when you're reading the book, for reading the Odyssey and the Aeneid, for example, that is independent, because you do quite a bit of that from outside as part of your homework. But you get sort of for one of the homeworks, you get a reading booklet, and you have to answer questions as you're reading it. So it's almost structured in the way that they want you to approach your reading of the thing. So it is independent, but you do get a lot of guidance.
Thank you, Stan. I mean, as a college as a whole, sort of part of our ethos is encouraging students as much as possible to be independent learners, but obviously, as both Stan and Natalia have said, with that support in place as well. And obviously you spend quite a lot of time in the classroom every week. You're spending 4 hours in the classroom, but then we do expect you to be spending between 4 and 5 hours outside of the classroom. And this is the same for all of your subjects that you might study here, 4 or 5 hours outside of the classroom. And that will include homework and another type of home learning that we call structured learning as well. So yeah, there is quite a lot of homework to do, but lots of that is, you know, set tasks. So so you have to carry it, you have to complete the work independently, but you're given lots of guidance. Okay, so the next question I have here is, are the exam questions structured similarly to history? Now, this is a really interesting question, because my answer to that would be no, that they're not structured in a similar way, because actually classical civilization isn't really like history. So in history, you're studying really big events and big figures, big characters, whereas in classical civilization, you're studying a culture and a society and sort of different parts of that culture. So the questions, even though there's still essay questions, and that would be the same for history or English or psychology, whatever sort of essay-based subject you're doing, but yeah, they're quite different to history, I would say. And it's a different subject, history, and actually, you know, neither of our students do history who you're meeting today, but lots of our students do history as well as classical civilization, because they're interested in the past. But that's really sort of where the similarities end. So hopefully that answers your question, but if it doesn't quite, then feel free to type in again. Okay. Oh, so another question, will we look at modern followers of the ancient Greek religion? Now, that's a really interesting question. Now, I didn't really even know there were modern followers of ancient Greek religion until recently. And that's the sort of thing we would explore further, I think, in Classics Club, because that's something, you know, often in Classics Club, we're exploring areas that, that I'd like to know more about as well. But I often think that there should be more followers of ancient Greek religion. It makes quite a lot of sense in many ways, apart from the animal sacrifice. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Oh, okay, that's fine. Do we have one teacher or multiple? So at the moment in the department, we have 2 teachers. So there is myself and the other teacher, Lauren, who's wonderful. So yeah, obviously the number of teachers depends on the sort of size of the cohort, but we both have degrees in classical civilization, so are more than qualified to teach it. So yeah, 2 teachers at the moment, but obviously that is always subject to change. Okay, so this is a good one actually, for both of you, I think. So would you advise not taking all essay-based subjects? So Stan, this is your only really essay-based subject. So why don't you sort of tell us your thoughts? And you can also sort of draw on maybe experience of your friends or other people you know. So would you advise not taking all essay-based subjects?
Well, this is, yeah, as Sarah said, this is my only essay-based subject. I do maths and physics, and I find that it's quite a nice break in that I have to go from a very logical to a more abstract sort of environment. But I find that with sort of writing the essays or whatnot, you get quite a lot of time to prepare and plan the essays that you write. So with it being an essay-based subject, you do get time to consolidate and sort of think about what you want to put in these essays, and as I'm sure that's the same with other subjects. So it's there will be a lot of sort of writing, but as homework and stuff, you don't really get too many essays as part of your homework. So outside you sort of get more tasks instead of essays, so it's not too demanding in the classics as an essay-based subject.
Okay, that's great, thank you, Stan. Natalia, what do you think?
I think it's quite a difficult question to answer because it kind of depends on your personal preference, because I take English literature and Spanish, which you do actually write essays in as well, but they're in Spanish, so like I guess it's kind of not the same thing. But I do feel like Stan said, I think if you think in kind of abstract ways and you work better writing essays, then I don't think it matters kind of how many essay subjects you have. So yeah.
That's great, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. It is sort of down to personal preference and how you find you work best, really. I mean, what's really brilliant about Reigate College is there's a lot of choice of different types of subjects with different levels of writing in. So it's worth, having a good look at the website and looking at all those different subjects so that you can get the right combination for you. And there'll also be opportunities on introductory day and at your enrolment interviews and on choices day to have those conversations with teachers and get a little bit more idea about what sort of level of writing's involved. Okay, so this is a really good question. I'm really pleased that someone's asked this. Is Greek mythology a topic we will cover a lot? Yeah, so often that can be a little bit of a misconception about classics, is that it's basically studying Greek mythology. And what I would say is that we do cover quite a bit of Greek mythology, but we don't really study it. It's not a mythology course. So when we look at the Odyssey and the Aeneid, there are gods, immortals, different levels of gods involved in those, but we more look at their role in the story rather than the sort of Stephen Fry mythos type of mythology that you might be used to seeing. And in Greek religion, in the second year, we will study a few myths, but we study them more as a background to the religious practice that we think was actually taking place. So yeah, I would say this is not a Greek mythology. This is not a Greek mythology course. Okay, what types of jobs can you do with classics? Well, you can sort of do anything with classics because it covers so many different areas and it teaches you so many different, what we call transferable skills. The most important one is being able to form an argument. So the types of essays that you'll be doing will be asking your opinion and asking you to defend your opinion. And I can't think of any job in the whole wide world where you don't need to do that at some point. Whether that is writing an academic essay or whether that is writing an email requesting or asking for a pay rise, you need to be able to put together a good solid argument. And also I think because it gives you so many different skills in terms of literary sources, visual sources, it also encourages you to think really openly. I think I alluded to earlier the fact that we don't really know much for sure about the ancient world, and it sort of makes you realize that we don't really know much for sure about our own world is that our interpretation is very much dictated about what we're presented with. And in a world that is so dominated by images and social media, I think it's really important for everyone to be able to look at that with a really critical eye, and you will learn to do that. And I think employers appreciate that greatly. I mean, obviously there are sort of the obvious jobs that you can go into, like working in a museum or going into teaching or working for exam boards, those sorts of things. But actually, we find that students go on to study at university a huge variety of subjects, whether that be psychology or accountancy or media communications or sociology. We had a student who went off to study equine science last year. We had a zoologist a few years before that. So yeah, there's lots of, it basically keeps the job market open for you, and the skills that you will acquire doing classical civilization will hopefully open up even more of the job market for you. Hopefully that answers that question. Okay, right, so brilliant. This I'm going to direct at my students again. So what are your top tips before starting the course? All right, I'll go Natalia first.
To be honest, I think just having a genuine interest in classics, like Stan said, honestly, reading Percy Jackson helps so much. And yeah, I think just having an open mind, and also don't go into it with too many expectations, because I think classics is a very broad subject, and I think you'll find out things you never would have thought you would study in classics. So yeah, I think because it's really good fun. I love it. So yeah, just go into it with that kind of mindset.
That's great. Thank you, Natalia. Stan, what do you think? Top tips?
Mine would sort of be to keep your mind as broad as possible. So try and, instead of just, I don't know, reading a textbook or reading a book or something, also watch documentaries, you know, go on websites, find out fun facts or whatever, because it really does broaden your knowledge, and you can apply that knowledge that you've learned from different areas within your essay, within your essays that you write. So mine would sort of be, don't limit yourself to just one or two sort of things that you do, not necessarily revision like in the way that, but it's you know, keep your mind open to all sort of elements with the course.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I've just got one final question for you both. So Natalia, what's been your favourite part of the course?
That's tough, because like I said earlier, there's kind of so much, but I do think my favourite topic that we've done is probably either Greek religion or imperial image, just because I find it really fascinating to find out kind of how society worked, and also because Sarah always says, classics is everywhere, and from kind of studying the ancient world in those topics, you can kind of see classics everywhere. I know I just said that, but so yeah, I just find that really interesting, and it kind of, you can learn how classics kind of shaped Western society, really.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Stan?
My favorite part, I think, was probably the places of worship part that we did, a part of the Greek religion. I really like looking at Delphi and the Acropolis and all that sort of things, because I really like sort of looking at where people worship the gods, how they impacted their lives or whatnot, and they're really impressive buildings. And I'm just gutted I didn't get to go on one of the trips to go and see it because of COVID, but that'd be really interesting to go and see those things, because they are so big and so dominant. Even nowadays they're still standing, so yeah, really cool.
Well then, Stan, you must go. Yeah. It's still there, even though we haven't been able to go there, so definitely that would make me very happy to think that lots of you had gone off to visit there. Okay, so that's the end of the Q&A. I'm just going to run through a couple more things. So as a department, we have really good results. I've put down the last sort of examined year results there, the 2018 to 19 results, and then I've put the results from last year as well. But generally, you know, our students are really hardworking, they really enjoy the subject, and you know, I feel like hopefully they feel like they're prepared for the exam and the assessment. So you can see we've got some really good results that we're really proud of. Our students come from a diverse range of backgrounds. They've gained places at a range of universities. I talked a little bit about the subjects they've gone on to study a while ago, and they progressed to study a wide range of subjects. So it doesn't narrow your options at all, I would say, about classics. In terms of preparing for the course, so we listened to Stan and Natalia's top tips. I mean, there is so much. I'm not going to talk through everything on this screen because this doesn't even sort of touch the surface. Most of this stuff is available on streaming services, and any one of those things will give you a little bit of an idea about the classical world. But as you may know, some of you from, if you've had your interviews already, is that there will be new starter activities that will be put on the website at some point next term. So I'd really encourage you all to engage with those, do them. They won't take long. I know you'll all just want to rest after your GCSEs. It will give you a really good idea of the sort of tasks we do in classics, and the sort of subjects that we study. Okay, so that is everything from me. I'd just like to say thank you to Natalia and Stan. You've been really brilliant. Thank you for all your feedback and your input. I'm sure the people at home found that really valuable. And thank you everyone for attending. And I really hope to see your actual faces at the end of the summer term. So have a lovely evening. Take care and see you soon.